All right. I want to talk about Job. And what I want to talk about is some things that I was actually listening to from a pastor named Peter Ruckman, who has a lot to say about the book of Job. And my wife was recently started reading it, and she had some ideas that were coming to her just reading the first chapter or so. And we were talking for a little bit, and a lot of these things just started flowing. So I figured, you know what, I'm gonna make a video about it because there's so much to unpack from this that I need to go over the book again to really get into it and add to it. But this is just from me reading it a while ago and listening to, like I said, Ruckman talk about it, and then actually having a conversation with the wife about it. So anyway, one of the interesting things she said, which these things you can go over them so many times and it just never really clicks with you. But it was like, what is Job's actual problem? And if you look at his name, which is funny, is that we pronounce it in English job, right? As if you're going to do a job, like some work. And it's interesting that the only thing that you can find fault with Job is that he is living by his own work, right? He's not walking by faith. He's going by his own works. And it's interesting that his name is Job and how we pronounce it Job. Because there's the way it describes him when you're starting to read the book of Job is that this man is perfect and upright. He's full of integrity. He's nice. He's kind. He's a great guy. He's even looking out for his children and worried about them. There's like no fault you can find in him. That's unless you can see into his heart, like God can. And it was like I was telling people about in other videos, asking the question like, are you good? And works versus faith is that outwardly you can see people that look like they're good, godly people. But they might be doing it just to win people over, to make people think that they're good. They might be doing it to try to win over God. Like, you got to take me to heaven because I'm so good, kind of thing. You know what I mean? So you don't really know the heart and the intention because they might not be doing these things out of love for God, out of love for their fellow man. They might be doing it out of love for themselves. They might be doing it out of fear of hell, kind of thing. So I think that's what was going on with Job, but I think Job had really good intentions. He just started to become self-righteous to the point where he was on the verge of being kind of like how Lucifer fell. Because Lucifer was made great and perfect and wonderful. And I think it went to his head where he started to think it was of himself and that he himself is so great. And he stopped relying on God and started to think he can do everything himself. Matter of fact, he could do it better. And I think Job was close to maybe becoming that. But God loved him and prevented that and actually used him as an example of Jesus. You see, Job, as we see, is perfect according to the letter of the law, right? And yet all these horrible things happen to him. He goes from the riches to losing his home. He loses basically all his money through all his camels and lambs and goats, all his farm animals. He loses the farm. He loses his children. He loses his wife. He loses his health. He can't sleep. I mean, he loses everything. He gets nothing really to have or to live for, right? He's basically just slowly dying and he's suffering while he's doing it, but he still refuses to curse God. So he still loves God. He still wants to obey him, but he's also, when you listen to him, he he's relying on himself and on his own righteousness and his own integrity, which to us is outstanding, but all of our works are as filthy rags to God. And I think Job is an example of that. And he's an example, like I said, of Jesus, because Jesus gave up everything, all of heaven, to give us all salvation, give us all eternal life, without us even asking for it. A lot of us don't even acknowledge him, or some of us even curse him. Yet he still does this for us. And I think it's funny how Christians today, they want the money. They think if they got the money, God is blessing them. And if anybody else wants money, even though some of these people get money by inheritance and very little work, a lot of luck and what have you, or scheming, they tell all the others to go get a job and do this and that and the other thing. Right? Even though God freely gave us everything for nothing. He just gave us a handout. Literally, it's a handout, which a lot of people look down on. Like, they're insulted if they get a handout, like it's some kind of disgrace. And in some senses it is, but I mean, you got to humble yourself there. I mean, we're not God, we're not perfect, we're not infallible, we're not anything super special, only in our own eyes. So taking a handout, sometimes you need it. And when it comes to salvation, you definitely need it. So, just here, I haven't even got into some of these scriptures I want to get into. There's so much you can say about the book of Job that it's interesting. It is very interesting. And yeah, this guy is an outstanding guy compared to me and anybody else I can think of besides Jesus himself. Nobody else that I know of that's really talked about like Job that I can think of off the top of my head in the Bible. And he had it all taken from him, and he had it all restored as well. And this is what happens with Jesus as well. He has it all taken away from him, but then he also has it all restored. So we see an example of Jesus, someone that everybody thinks is cursed, and God hates him because he's basically a jobless, homeless man. Again, connected job, no job, he's not working for his salvation kind of thing, right? Jesus lived by faith. He showed us. He gave us an example, like a good parent. He lived it out, how to live by faith, right? And he dies for us. And I kind of lost track of my thoughts here because I got so many coming through here. Oh yeah, they were looking at Jesus as he's cursed because he's a jobless homeless man. He gets beaten and humiliated and on a cross, and people think, well, yeah, he deserves it because God wouldn't let that happen to him if he wasn't a liar, if he wasn't full of shit, if he wasn't, a sinner. But the book of Job is to let you know that's not what's going on here. Not at all. Just because you're perfect doesn't mean you're going to get all the blessings and no hardship in your life whatsoever. Matter of fact, hardship a lot of times is good for you because it humbles you and it gets you to look to God. Because a lot of times when you're all comfortable, you don't even think about God. You're just like, whatever, I'm good, and you just coast on through, and you become weak in a lot of ways. Weak in your mental faculties, weak in your physical faculties, in your emotional faculties, because everything's way too smooth and easy, and it just lulls every bit of you. All your body, your mind, your soul, your spirit, all just become weak because there's no resistance in your life whatsoever. So a lot of times having hardships actually are good for you. Like the curse given upon Adam to have to till the ground is actually good for him. The life being all easy, he would have just been lulled to sleep and, would have been like, whatever. And that's how a lot of people are. And that's why Jesus says, woe to the rich. That it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to go to heaven. Because you give up all your ease and your comfort. Because Jesus tells the rich to give up all they have and give to the poor just like he did. He gave an example of it. He gave up all of heaven so that we can have it. So he's like, yeah, do the same thing. That's why I say the rich have an opportunity to connect to Jesus in a way other people don't, because they have so much riches to give up, just like Jesus did for other people, and a lot of them won't even care. A lot of them are going to feel entitled to it and take advantage of it and just squander it. And you'll be able to relate to Jesus in a way a lot of other people wouldn't. But anyway, I want to get into a few things here. Such as in Galatians chapter 3, it says, but that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident, for the just shall live by faith. Right? And that's what you can kind of see with Job. He was doing a job. He seemed to have lacked the faith, right? That's the only thing that you can really get out of it is he didn't have faith in God's righteousness. He was having faith in his own righteousness. And I think when we look at that, we'll see that that was probably the example that he gave to his first 10 children. And I think that might be a representation maybe of Israel. And I'll explain in a second here. I wanted to also bring up how this is in the Old Testament. In Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 4 says, behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. All right? So this is not just a New Testament kind of thing. It's been there in the Old Testament. The just shall live by faith. Abraham being the first example, being a actual Gentile. And it's the same thing with Job and Enoch, Gentiles. But anyway, I wanted to get into how I think what was going on and why his 10 children are taken out right here. I think it was his example of not relying on God's righteousness, but his own. Right? It says here in Job chapter 1, verse 18, it says, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. Right? So they were all together, eating and drinking wine. And it reminds me of things like what Jesus says is in the end of time, it's going to be like in the days of Noah where everybody's eating and drinking and giving in marriage and whatnot. And then all of a sudden destruction, the end comes. Jesus comes as a thief in the night. And wine is representing teachings, right? So they're taking part of some kind of teaching, and it might be the example of Job that he doesn't realize that he's giving. And it says, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and only I am escaped alone to tell thee. And this is one of his servants who said he escaped when the house came crumbling down. And you notice how it says, great wind from the wilderness smote the four corners of the house, and the house came crashing down. That sounds like a powerful wind or a weak house, right? But we go to Matthew chapter 7. This is at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. So read chapters 5 and 6, and you'll be able to read the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus talks about things about, yeah, you may keep the letter of the law, but if you hate your brother, you may not have committed murder, but in your heart you're a murderer. Oh, you may not commit adultery, but you're looking at others sexually, lusting after them. You're committing adultery in your heart. Right? So he's talking about how there's the letter of the law, and the spirit of the law is a little deeper. And at the end of all this, he says, therefore, at verse 24, therefore whosoever heareth the sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. You see, that house was not built upon a rock. It wasn't built upon Jesus. It wasn't built upon faith. It was built upon works. The works of the flesh, the works of the law, the works of the letter of the law. And it says, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And you notice something else I want to add in. It's a little bit off subject, but throughout the Bible, God is referred to as the rock. Jesus is talking about his teachings here is a rock. He also talks about in Matthew chapter 16 that what Peter professed is the rock, and what Jesus professed is that Jesus is the Son of the living God, the Christ, the Messiah. Peter is not the foundation of the church. The only way you see that is if you take Matthew chapter 16 and you twist it, and that's the only place where you can do that. But if you do that, you've got a couple problems, because right after Jesus supposedly calls Peter the rock, he rebukes Satan out of him. If you just read on a few more verses, he has to rebuke Satan out of Peter. So if Peter's the foundation, it's a shaky foundation. The gates of hell are not supposed to prevail. Well, he's already possessed by Satan. And Peter ends up denying Jesus 3 times publicly. And Jesus says, if you deny me before men, then I'll deny you before my Father. Right? So you got to really know the scriptures. Make sure things aren't being twisted and taken out of context and being manipulated. And you got to prayerfully do so. The Holy Spirit will teach you and guide you in all things here. And it says, and every one that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. So you see, you hear this, and you don't do these things. It's like you built your house upon sand. And when the storm comes and the wind blows, it comes crashing down. And that's what we actually read about a bit here. The winds came and smote the house, and it came crushing down. Because when I read Job, I was confused a bit about why all this happened to Job, but I was also confused about, but what about his children? It's like they're just, like what, non-player characters? Like they don't matter? They don't have their own lives? Like, why are they just like whatever in this story? It's like they're not, I don't know, kind of like they're just blocks of clay, or some dogs that they're just meaningless. But then I was thinking after this, well, maybe they're an example of they're building their house on sand, and they're just following the example of their father, who is basing everything off of the works of man, his own works, his own righteousness, his own integrity, and he's not building on faith upon the rock. So this is an example of this happening. And yeah, these are just some of the interesting things that you can get into getting into Job. And this is just in the first chapter. You see, and it says, in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. right? It just talks about how upright Job is. So that's the only thing you can think of is he's relying on himself, thinking that he can stand to God as if he's guiltless and innocent, and basically, I would say, unable to even fall or to sin, right? But yeah, as a book to definitely read and study. But I think I said everything I want to say right now. Very interesting stuff. So, that being said, thanks for watching and take care.